our downtown. So I'm going to just provide very brief context, and then Hugh Futrell and Dick Carlisle, who are other members of the coalition, are going to kind of flesh out our comments. But again, we believe this is a critical, both a great opportunity and a critical need for our community, and are appreciative of the city's responsiveness to the proposal that we put forward. The context really is for the September 22nd meeting, at which consideration of Courthouse Square and unification will be on the council agenda. So we want to kind of address today, if we may, three things. Funding for Courthouse Square, a design that we think makes sense right now for this community, that is less expensive than what has gone before, but that can be tailored to really meet the specific needs and concerns of the members of our community. And then finally talk about the offer that we're making relative to doing some of the construction drawings once the design is approved, so that we can help the city with the costs associated with this process. So with that context, I think I'm going to turn it over to Hugh next to speak to the other issues.
Since I'm kind of on the end here, I'll stand if you don't mind. I think all of us on the coalition, and there are a number of us in the audience here as well, are very excited about the commitment that the council has shown, both collectively and individually, and the hard work and the commitment of staff to getting this done as well. We view this as collaborative, and we're very happy about the progress that we're making now. There are a couple of fundamental issues that we're conscious of, we want to bring to the community's attention. Hope you'll have the opportunity to discuss it, think about it a little bit, and decide how to proceed. The most fundamental issue is time. Time is the enemy of getting this project done as soon as it really needs to be done. Timelines are ruthless. And one of the timelines is that in order for this project to be under construction next spring, in order for it to be completed, and I'm talking now only about the first phase of work, which is the streets and the parking around the perimeter. For that to get done in time, to be absolutely sure that there's no conflict with merchants or with the public next year, the council needs to be taking an action relatively soon, either at the end of the third quarter or fairly early in the fourth quarter, to be able to authorize the commencement of construction drawings. One of the sheets that you've got there is a sheet that shows the timeline in some detail to help illuminate the nature of the problem. These drawings will not be simple. There's PG&E, there's demolition, there's public safety concerns. All that has to be taken into account by the designers. There's going to be a need to negotiate a contract with a civil engineer and related consultants. As Jonathan alluded to, and I think the council's aware, the coalition has proposed to provide the funding for those construction drawings and to provide them. Those drawings then have to be plan checked. They have to be reviewed, changed. There's going to be a process of value engineering with a selected general engineering contractor to ensure that it's done as efficiently as possible. Plan check process then completed, and then there's a public bid process that the city has to go through. All that means that for us, the September 22nd date that will be arriving fairly soon is important for the council, ideally, to take an action to approve not the total design, but the basic street layout, which is fundamentally already done by the EIR, except the fact that we're willing to provide the construction drawings, and if not adopt a funding plan, at least to know that by a date certain the details of a funding plan will have been approved and adopted. If those things are done in September or perhaps even early October, then this project really can happen next year with all the benefits that everyone is conscious of in terms of community feeling and economic development. Those 50% of the storefronts around the square that are empty, for example, can begin to be filled. On the issue of funding, this is a $7.3 million project constructed in two phases. Phases can be bookended, but they're two phases. How do we know those numbers? We spent some time to analyze them, and our understanding is that after we first provided these numbers, now 8 months ago that the city first got our proposals, The city staff of Public Works has done some vetting and has drawn some conclusion that our numbers are pretty reasonable. That includes significant contingencies, and it also includes design costs as well. About $4.5 million of that is the demolition and the exterior infrastructure and the creation of nearly 50 additional parking spaces as we've proposed. There is another 2.7 or 2.8 million of final interior improvements that's part of that total package. We did originally suggest that the city should do this in 2 bookended construction phases, but that the funding plan for the total should be adopted together. And the reason we think it would be wise to do that, and we understand now that the city believes that as well, is once you've locked in the funds for the interior improvements, that does create a certain design discipline for the ultimate numbers. We know that there's a number of ways to deal with the funding plan, and those have been outlined in the memoranda that we provided the city and the materials you've got there. We know that there have been, for example, suggestions that the city could do a general obligation bond for these improvements. That's certainly one approach. Another approach is to piece together funds from different elements, such as parking reserves. Since we're building a lot of parking, well, we're not building anything like a garage, but 40-some spaces is a lot of additional parking. Parking garages are really expensive. This is a relatively economical way to produce parking. I think there's a view that spending some money from parking reserves for that purpose is not unreasonable. One could, for example, also borrow from parks, reserves in the parks system, park development fee, not to take money away from the other areas, because there is and will continue to be downtown housing that contributes to those funds. That's another approach. One could also do a short-term loan, for example, from the city's general fund repaid through the capital improvement program. We've outlined a number of those. I won't belabor all those details. The fact is, those things can be pieced together, and we know staff has been looking closely at those alternatives. And there's also the alternative of a straight-out loan from the general fund to be repaid through an enhanced infrastructure district, which is a subject which the council undoubtedly, in the months ahead, will begin to be talking about, because it is an extraordinary tool for producing a very large amount of money for downtown infrastructure. The point is, I guess, to emphasize here, is that if the council acts relatively soon, this can be done next year. And there are several different roads in terms of funding to get to the result that is needed, which is either to minimize or use no general fund dollars for this purpose, or if general fund dollars are used at the discretion of the council, through a bonding mechanism. In the end, it's all up to the council. The opportunity is now front and center available for you to act. Just a couple of comments before Dick talks about design and this notion of the 2 phases. As a coalition, we do not want to dictate what goes on in the interior of this design. What we view our role is to facilitate and to help the city get the surrounding infrastructure completed in a timely way. And then there's going to be a form of public process, of course, to re-review the interior of those improvements. Ultimately, select a final landscape architect and related consultants. Do that work, plan check it, and install it. There may be other proposals that come forward on the interior. We are not preempting or preventing any third-party proposals of any kind. We're just trying to get this done. And also in a way that is transparent. As transparent as possible. We don't want anybody to think that we are dominating or dictating. We're just trying to help. And that being said, Dick?
Time is very scarce here, so I'm going to go over this pretty rapidly. There'll probably be questions that I can maybe answer later on. But this is what we're proposing, which is not unlike the design as most of you know, this coalition started back in '97 with this design. In 2004, city embarked on a major design for a classic square just like this, which was done, and the only difference between this and our proposal is we've reversed the traffic direction. Traffic direction is clockwise, like the SWA plan, and that's the only difference really between that and this plan that was done in 2004. Now, the importance of that reversing, this is Santa Rosa Avenue, this is Mendocino, 4th, 3rd, just to get you oriented. The importance of that traffic flow is that everything starts becoming a right-hand turn. Before, we had to come up Santa Rosa Avenue, take a short, have a short stacking, and then try to get in here on a left-hand turn. This allows a stacking here of people who want to get into the square and move right on around the square. People coming down 3rd Street come in and around. People 4th Street. People coming down Mendocino Avenue can come in and go right around the square. So it really helps facilitate the flow of traffic. And that's why they switched to the clockwise motion of the traffic in the SWA plan. Now, why the classic square? We always compare it to Sonoma and Healdsburg. We're not trying to copy those. Those are their own little entity. Classic square, like Healdsburg, and I'm going to compare it to that. You calm the traffic down with diagonal parking. I'll show you that with some examples here in a minute. You have very pedestrian, you have bulb outs, major bulb outs and landscaping to make these very pedestrian friendly. It slows the traffic down. When you look at, here's Healdsburg here. Here's 4th Street in Railroad Square. That edge slows traffic down. If you go down 4th Street here in Railroad Square, you go slow because of that diagonal parking. It's an edge. It's a friction. Unlike what we've got right now, where you're just flying right through there. There's no edge there. Well, that's why the traffic goes fast. That's why there's nothing to calm it down. In Healdsburg, there's continuous parking against their square. And that does another. That provides a buffer. Diagonal parking provides a buffer for people dining and walking on the sidewalk. It provides a buffer and an edge for whatever activities in the park. That's why if you were eating lunch on this bench in Healdsburg, it's a lot quieter than having a flow-through traffic going right next to you like we've got. So these are all traffic calming alternatives that we've put in the classic design. And what we're doing here, like, there is an outer square in a configuration like this, which is the dining and the commercial area, and then there's the inner square. There's really 2 squares. It's important to keep in mind. The other thing we want to have is bicycle friendly. You have bicycle lanes on 3rd Street. You have one on Santa Rosa Avenue on this side. This one isn't completed on the other side, but it provides a tie back to Sonoma Avenue and Prince Memorial Greenway. What we want to do here is put a designated bicycle lane right around the square. Have bicycle parking at all 4 corners. And you see this one here? This is in Long Beach, where you paint, it's a shared bicycle thing, but you paint it like this. We could paint this right down the middle, so it's very designated, ties right into the bicycle lanes on 3rd Street. Mendocino Avenue is a bicycle route, so this can all work together and be a focal point for bicycles. That's what we want to do, is make this very pedestrian and bicycle friendly. And on top of that, we want to have the pneumatic bollards at each intersection here, so we can close it off. We don't have to have any cars for special events and other occasions. So, like you said, we're concentrating on this outer phase. Get the skeleton, get the structure there. That's the important thing. One of the things that we've been conscious of is when you have this outer square and the inner square, you have to look beyond that. It's like urban planners call it the octopus. Where do you tie back to parking like this breezeway next to Flavor? Where do you tie back to this pedestrian friendliness? Where do you tie back to the Transit Mall, Prince Memorial Greenway? Where do you tie back to the mall? Where do you tie back to Mendocino? This thing, you've got to look back like it's the center of activity for our community, and that you have these arms reaching out to all these other connections. I'm not going to get into the details of this because, like you said, we want to get the community involved in this, but this leaves a lot of opportunity for community input. We want to save the Christmas tree, the bunya tree, the two big redwood groves on each end. Those are important. We can save the Asawa fountain. That's important. So with those givens, then we can fill in with more community involvement and activities and features that be for the community. I'm going to stop there and give you maybe a few statistics, and then we can go on. One thing, when you do compare it with Healdsburg, this being, if you look at the brown around the edge, that's the edge of the living room. That's the vertical walls that are up around the square. That really forms the living room. This is Healdsburg's. If you put Healdsburg's edge against the Bank of America and another edge along in front of Flavors and Eureka Federal Building, you can see that here's the edge of the buildings in Healdsburg, here's the Empire Building out here, here's the edge of the buildings in Healdsburg, here's Exchange Bank and 4th Street. We're about 33% bigger than Healdsburg, just to give you a perspective. 1/3 bigger. This area that's left for community, it's very similar to adding up the other two sides. It's difficult to add them up. It's because there's not a lot of usable area in some of those areas. You got big planters around trees, so some of it isn't usable, but it's within 5% of what we got now. So you're not losing anything as far as space. In fact, you're gaining it because you have the concentration of a bigger area. So you have the ability to fill it with community activities. I want to give you one example. My wife and I went back to New York several years ago, and we visited Bryant Park. And one of the simple, that's what I want to stress, is whatever we do in here in the future needs to be simple and effective and flexible. They had taken a park that wasn't working, and they had simple metal folding chairs. They had students handing them out. It became a very popular thing because then you could have groups sitting around at lunch, flexible, whether it's 10, 20, 2, 3, 4. These flexible metal chairs did amazing things in that park. People would sit on one, have another one, put their feet up, and have their laptop. Whatever it was, It was something flexible, rather than concrete benches and things like that. You have something that's very simple and flexible. And that's what we want to emphasize here. This is for the community. One of the themes that we've kind of come up with is that Courthouse Square is a place to go to, not through. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring it to committee first for any comments or questions. Any of my fellow council members have any questions or comments?
I don't have any questions, just a couple of comments. This is my first meeting at this subcommittee, but I've been closely following this issue for as long as everybody in the room. I'm very happy to see it come to this point. I think that this is the way we should be moving. The idea that's on the table now, or that has been approved by the council now, the SWA plan, I don't think is achievable. I don't know that we can ever find the money to do that. I'm hearing what you guys are saying about timing, and I understand the urgency that people are feeling. My concern is that while I know that you all have talked to the council members individually, and this has been talked about in this meeting a couple of times, that the city council has not talked about this particular plan. We're going to do that. At this point, it's scheduled for September 22nd. I'm glad we were able to get that moved up. I think that staff understands the urgency of the situation, the interest that I believe the majority of the council has, maybe the unanimous majority of the council has, to get this done. My concern, though, is that we still haven't discussed this in a general public council meeting. This meeting is a public meeting, but obviously 8:30 on Tuesday mornings is not the place that we make these kind of decisions. So I'm looking forward to getting this out there, getting the discussion happening in public, and getting this vetted, getting it in front of the entire community. And I think that people will understand the reason why we want to do this rather than the SWA plan. We're also talking about the possibility of using general fund money, which in the past has been something that we've stated we weren't going to do. Personally, if the financing plan is right, I don't have a problem myself putting general fund into this project. I think that this is a project that's going to stimulate a lot more than we put into it. But this needs to be talked about in a public setting. It needs to be debated. This has always been something that a vocal segment of the community has been opposed to. I have no problem myself defending it and pushing this forward, but it needs to be done in a very transparent, public manner, and I'm looking forward to doing that in the coming months.
Thank you. Councilman Alvarez.
I agree with the Vice Mayor. I like what I'm hearing, but I agree we need to have a public conversation. This is a big project for our community. We made a big commitment to the community, even with our Open Government Task Force. And transparency is going to be very important as we move forward. So at some point we need to start having the discussions out in public, and I agree, this is a public meeting, but it's a packed room. We would need a bigger venue and have that public meeting. So I look forward to finding how we can make that happen. And I'm sensitive to the timeline that's presented here, but if we're going to do this right, I also don't want to rush it either. So let's move to the next steps and see how we can have this public discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation. I'll echo my colleagues' thoughts about public meetings, of which this is one I look forward to having on the 22nd. A couple of questions, though, on the plan presented. Traffic calming was mentioned, but I didn't see it on 3rd Street at all. We've had those discussions in the past.
What
are we planning on, and you don't have to be detailed with it, I would just...
Yeah, we have looked at that, and you're right. Third Street is probably the fastest street here. With this crossing, and we're gonna create one here, what we probably will do is raise those up, make them almost like a hump, so we can slow this traffic down here. But we can do some things at these two crossings and some other things in here to slow this down.
As that would be part of the outside exterior infrastructure,
Yes.
that would have to be sooner rather than
Yes,
later, so
right.
you'll be working with staff on that?
Yeah.
Okay. And, has there been discussions with staff on the, what was the term? The new funding district, is that part of the financing alternatives in terms of the enhanced infrastructure district?
I don't think that that has yet been reviewed in detail by staff. I think that economic development is aware that this is a potential powerful tool. But it is just one of the things at this stage that's in the toolkit.
Right, but the committee itself hasn't discussed that, or would the committee be prepared to discuss that among themselves if staff brought that forward?
You mean the?
Your committee?
Oh, we've had conversations on our end, very definitely.
Okay.
Yes.
So you'll be coordinating with staff or with council members on that? 'Cause I'd like to see that further develop, if that's a possibility.
Yes.
Not that I'm against any of the other potentials, I would just like to make sure that we've made ourselves aware of all the potentials.
With the apparently imminent settlement with the state over redevelopment, that does liberate the opportunity to actually begin work on setting up this district. Because the state law prevents these districts from being activated so long as there's any dispute with the Department of Finance over the redevelopment matters.
Okay. And then lastly, and I'm going to open up to the public, I'd like to also have the option of bike parking being on the street itself rather than in the square as it's a transportation mode. That's not a problem. Okay, any public comments?
Yes, sir.
I'm sure. Go ahead.
Hello, my name's Dwayne. I'm really quite interested in the market area survey that you've done. It's going to show us how much we're going to benefit financially, economically from all these activities. I hope you'll make that available well before the September 22nd meeting with the public. The train has already left the station, obviously, on this project, so I just want to have everybody be really well informed about how the monies will be replenished. I don't believe that any general fund money should be spent, but if that's what's going to occur, let's see when we can get it back. And then last but not least, why do we need traffic down there? I've been to a number of really nice cities throughout the world in which the cars have been taken out, in which they've just said, hey, the square and the people that come here to shop in this district are far more important than the people that drive through and pollute our area downtown. So why don't you just also give us the alternative of what it would be like if you didn't have the traffic going through there and you let those merchants have their shops out on the street again. We had a really nice square, and I could walk or ride my bicycle there and leave my clunker at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On time, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Mr. Schwartz.
Well, I would say that general fund money has been spent on the square for 35 years, particularly in terms of police calls to the west side of the square. And I hope everybody recognizes that the status quo is not a benign situation. I think not only are we defaulting on commercializing that area for sales tax revenues, but dead spaces engender undesirable and sometimes criminal behavior. And I know Councilmember Oliveras will vouch for the vast number of police calls over the last 30 years. In terms of removing traffic, the big difference between us and Europe is that we have no residential density. And I believe that this is something that would enable development of mixed-rate housing. We certainly have a lot of big plots, big areas on Mendocino and the White House within proximity. And if we develop this as, a vital, active area, I think we're going to create a neighborhood. And at that point, when we have residential density, I think we can start to look at diminishing the car traffic.
Any other comments? Well, I guess that brings us to the end of our meeting. I thank you all for attending. I hope you all show up on the September 22nd council meeting for the continued discussion on this item. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Every single time I mean, ask people to do.
Oh, I'm sorry.